This is Wilderness and Wildlife, presented by the Gallatin Wildlife Association in Bozeman, Montana. This is a half-hour program featuring commentaries and interviews with conservation specialists relating to the unique natural environment that we enjoy in the wildlands of the West and across America. I'm your host, Jay Shell. Our guest today is Dr. Cindy Elliser, who moved to the Pacific Northwest in 2014 and founded Pacific Mammal Research to study marine mammals in the Salish Sea, particularly Harbour Porpoises and Harbour Seals. She's the author of numerous papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals and has presented at international scientific conferences. She received her PhD in integrative biology from Florida Atlantic University in 2010 and worked for 10 years studying Atlantic spotted and mottled bottlenose dolphins in the Bahamas. Dr. Elliser also teaches as an adjunct professor at Skaggit Valley College in Mount Vernon, Washington. So welcome, Cindy. So you've been here doing research for how long?
So in 2014 is when I founded Pacific Mammal Research, so this will be 6 years going on now that we've been doing our work out here.
How do you collect your information?
So we actually do a lot of land-based work. Marine mammal research is usually boat-based, but in certain places you can do land-based where you can sit on the rocks and watch the animals come by water close to shore. And so we're lucky enough that we are able to do that. But recently we got a boat, so we'll be heading out on the water a bit too to see if we can get more information.
Sure, okay. And what's the role of your science advisory board for PMR?
So the Science Advisory Board is there to help us in any case that we have questions or something comes up with that we have questions about within the science of the research that they may have more expertise in than we do. We can tap their information and say like, hey, what do you think about this that we saw? And just kind of be able to talk about it and figure out what's going on.
So your collaboration with other organizations or entities?
Yeah, so at Pacific Mammal Research, we really believe in that we learn much more together than we do separately. Everybody has their specialties and what they look at, and if we can talk to each other, we'll find out a lot more. So, for example, we learned what mating behavior looked like for Harbour porpoises here because we went to a conference in California, talked to a group down there, and saw, that's what we're seeing here. And now that's morphing into, we're doing a whole paper with them about that mating behavior, and we're collaborating with other groups around the world to try to, show that this is a similar behavior for Harbour porpoises everywhere. So we do a lot of that within the Salish Sea region, and then also beyond, like I said, California, Oregon, and other places around the world where Harbour porpoises are, so that we can understand a lot more about them.
So that's your objective, is to try to find out more data about marine mammals of all kinds?
Yeah, so we will research anything that will come by our land-based site or our boat, Our main focus are Harbour porpoises and Harbour Seals. Particularly Harbour porpoises, we know very little about them. They've been overlooked for a very long time. They're very small, they're shy, they're kind of elusive. Other marine mammals are much easier to study. So we don't know a lot about them. I like to say that where we were 30 years ago with dolphins is where we are now with porpoises. We really know very little besides some basic information. So our main objective is to really find out as much as we can about Harbour porpoises and their lives and how we can help protect them. And then also Harbour Seals. We know more about Harbour Seals. There's more research has been done, but not at the more community or individual level. And that's what we really like to look at is, all of these are individuals, and we can follow them by looking at their photographs and matching them. So to be able to look at their populations through that lens is a really interesting one that isn't always done.
So what's the difference between a porpoise and a dolphin?
That's a great question. It's one of my favorite ones. So a porpoise and a dolphin, they're both cetaceans. So a cetacean is a whale, a dolphin, or a porpoise. And we always hear whales and dolphins, but porpoises kind of get left off. But basically, they're two different families. So there's family Delphinidae, which are the dolphins, and family Phocinidae, which are the porpoises. So they're related. But basically, the main difference is the one that you'll see the most is the dorsal fin. So porpoises have a triangular dorsal fin, and dolphins have a more curved or falcate dorsal fin. If you got to see their mouth, their face, most dolphins have a beak or a rostrum where their mouth comes out. So if you think of a bottlenose dolphin, the little cute little stubby nose, basically.
Sure.
But of course, not all dolphins have that. For example, orcas are the largest type of dolphin, and they don't have that, but most of the time they do. All porpoise species have that blunt face where there's no beak or rostrum. Dolphins have cone-shaped teeth. Porpoises have spade-shaped teeth, if you ever got to see inside their mouths. But their behavior is also very different. So dolphins are much more gregarious in larger groups, and they will be acrobatic at the surface of the water. They'll play and ride the boat wakes and bow ride. Mm-hmm. Porpoises are like, you can be over there, I'll be over here, thanks. So they're a little bit, they'll still do some of that stuff, but they're not as boisterous at the surface as dolphins are.
But they're both found in the same habitat, is that right?
Yes. So here in the Salish Sea, we have Harbour porpoises, we have Dall's porpoises, and then we have Pacific white-sided dolphins, and then orcas, which again are the largest type of dolphin. So we have both dolphins and porpoises here. Oh, okay. Porpoises are generally in colder waters, so and dolphins tend to be more warm, depending on the species. But you'll oftentimes find them in the same areas.
So are they mixed all the way through the Salish Sea, from up at the end of north end of Vancouver Island all the way down to the Tacoma area?
Do you mean the dolphins and porpoises?
Yeah.
So you find porpoises now everywhere from South Puget Sound, by Seattle, and all the way up through Canada. Okay. The dolphins, we have, again, with the southern residents, the resident orcas, you'll find them from Seattle to Vancouver as they travel around. But the Pacific white-sided dolphins are more oceanic, so they stay far, they're in more open waters. So you'll find them more just like in the strait and not as close to the islands and stuff. Oh, I see. Dall's porpoises aren't around as much, but you will see them within the islands sometimes. But so they are mixed, but they definitely have their areas that they prefer.
And they both tend to stay close to shore. They're not far out in the ocean.
So the Harbour porpoises, and that's where their name comes from, Harbour porpoise. So they spend most of their lives within a few miles from shore. Dall's porpoises will be found a little bit farther in deeper waters, but the Pacific white-sideds are usually in much more away from land. The orcas, they kind of do both. You'll see them come pretty close. You can go up to Lime Kiln on San Juan Island, and you can just watch them go by sometimes from land. But they'll also go out in deeper waters as well.
So talk about the Salish Sea. What's the condition of the sea?
So the Salish Sea is it's doing better than it has. It does get confused with Puget Sound. Salish Sea is actually a newer term within the last 10 or so years. I moved here, and that's all I've ever heard it. But I didn't realize a lot of people don't know what that term means. But so the Salish Sea is all the inland waters of Washington and Canada. So from Seattle all the way up through Vancouver.
So it includes Puget Sound.
So it includes Puget Sound, right. So there's the Puget Sound, the Georgia Strait, Strait of Juan de Fuca, San Juan Island area. So all of those are encompassed within the Salish Sea. So sometimes you'll hear the people say Salish Sea and Puget Sound kind of interchangeably, because the Puget Sound used to be what everybody called it. But technically, Puget Sound is more, I think it's Admiralty Inlet and South is the proper Puget Sound. But the whole area, it was highly polluted, and there was a lot of fishing and, all that kind of stuff going on. And the last few decades, we really tried hard to improve the water quality. And so the Harbour porpoise story is actually one that kind of shows how we're doing better. Because interestingly, in the 40s and 50s, you would see Harbour porpoises everywhere, but you saw very few Dall's porpoises. Oh, really? Then by the 1990s, Harbour porpoises were all but gone, particularly from the Puget Sound. Like they weren't there anymore. And you saw Dall's porpoises everywhere. And then by the early 2000s, we started seeing that switch again, where now Harbour porpoises are everywhere, and you see very few Dall's porpoises.
And what's responsible for that change?
So we don't know. First of all, because nobody was really looking at Harbour porpoises. So that's another reason why we're trying to learn more about them, is to not have that happen again. But there's probably a combination of effects. But if pollution was bad, which it was, gill nets are really bad for harbor porpoises, so that was a big issue, especially in the 70s and probably 80s even. Habitat destruction, so because they are close to shore, things we do on land radiate out into there. Mm-hmm. So all of those things were kind of bad, so maybe that probably, had them, drove them away from certain areas. And then as we tried to clean that up and do better, they've been able to come back, and so they're now over 11,000 in the Salish Sea.
Oh, really? Wow.
So I like to say it's a really nice story, because we always hear of all the bad things that are happening, but this one's like, no, look, these guys are doing good, and we've done better by cleaning this up, and it's making a difference. So, but we can't, if we don't know more about these animals, we can't prevent that from happening again.
And your data is collected from shore?
The majority of it, yeah.
On both dolphins and porpoises?
Mainly on the Harbour Porpoises and Harbour Seals. So our land-based site, the Harbour Porpoises and Seals are there year-round, and they come back. We know individuals that come back over days, weeks, months, and years.
I see.
We have seen a minke whale in there once. Some of our citizen scientists have seen a humpback whale go through. Gray whales were here last year. We did see some transient or Biggs killer whales come in for a bit, and we see them out a little bit outside of our study site, but we can still see them. So there's other ones around, but the ones that we mainly see on a daily basis are the Harbour Porpoises and Harbour Seals.
So you're not doing any tagging or radio collaring?
No.
Like that?
So for porpoises, in the first place, it would be really difficult, simply because their size is 5.5 feet, 150 pounds. So trying to biopsy, dart, or tag that kind of a small animal would be difficult in the first place, and they're very wary of boats and things. I also came from the Wild Dolphin Project in Florida, where the motto is "in their world, on their terms." So we did not. It was all non-invasive. Right? We just took pictures and stuff. So I really took that with me. Here, there's plenty we can learn and understand without doing the tagging and stuff. I mean, there is some great information you can get from that stuff. For us, that's not what we do.
So what kind of whales are found in the Salish Sea?
So whales, and that's an interesting story too. We have, the main ones are humpback whales and gray whales. And so again, this is another story of animals coming back to an area where they used to be that they weren't for a while, probably because of prey and whatnot, abundance. So humpback whales are shooting through the roof of how many we have here recently. Gray whales are doing well, although this last year there was a lot of them were coming up dead and stranded on the beaches.
But they are coming into the sound.
Oh yes, and we have some that come every year. Like there's the sounders that are there every year, and they always hang out here. And there's some newer ones coming in, and so they had a rough year this year, and they're still trying to figure out exactly what was happening with them. But so it's gray whales and humpbacks; those are our two big ones. But we have recently been seeing other research groups around the area, a fin whale that's popped in. And actually a couple different ones. They were different fin whales. We also have minke whales. Minke whales are fairly common. And then the other odd one that popped up was a sperm whale. Oh. They heard him on the hydrophones, actually. Uh-huh. And they're like, wait, what? So it was a little juvenile sperm whale that showed up. So we're starting to see some interesting changes for good, right? We're seeing these interesting new species that are kind of popping in and seeing if maybe they're going to continue to show up.
And then, of course, you've got the orcas.
And then, of course, the orcas, yeah. So we have the resident orcas, and then we have the Biggs killer whales or transient orcas. Residents are the ones that eat fish, the salmon, and then the transients or Biggs killer whales are the ones that eat marine mammals. And the reason why we say Biggs versus transient is because transient is... When they first started learning about them, they didn't seem to be around a lot, so that was the term that they used. Sure. But now that they've done a lot more research on them, they realize, they're actually almost more resident than the residents. Oh, really? To some degree. So it's not really a proper term for them. Uh-huh. So Biggs is named after the guy who started researching them. They're the ones that eat my porpoises and seals.
Oh, I see. Okay, you have a diminishing study group, is that right?
Well, they're doing fine. So but we do have many more Biggs killer whales coming into the Salish Sea in the last year or two than we have previously. Probably because the porpoises and seals are doing really good. So there are plenty of food.
So you're publishing your findings. Where are they located?
So we have links on our website. You can go to our publication page and you can go there. When they're just published, we can't post it on the website due to the journal requirements, so you can email us and we can send you a PDF.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, but for when the journal goes out, it kind of owns it for a while, and you have to wait before you can post it.
And your website is pacmam.com.
.org. Yeah, PACMAM.
Okay. Do the boats, the tourist boats that go out into the Sound or the Salish Sea, do they affect the marine mammals?
So that's a really good question. There's a lot of research, and a lot of the conferences that we've been going to lately have a whole lot about the noise levels in the ocean. And noise levels are really loud, and it's really important for marine mammals because they use echolocation to find their food. So they use sound to find food. They also use sound to communicate. Right? They have communication signals. So boats can have two problems. Well, three. They can hit the animals. So there's the direct threat. They can disrupt their behavior. So if you think about if you're going to a place to eat, and all of a sudden you have like 7 whale watch boats that or recreational boats that are out there hanging out there, you're like, oh, okay, I'll just go over here. Right. And so now you're not getting the same foraging time that you had before. So there's behavior disruptions, and then there's also the sound. So if they're trying to use echolocation or communicative signals, it's basically like if you were giving a talk and everybody else, the 100 people that you were giving the talk to were also talking, you would eventually lose your voice. Oh. And then sometimes they have to raise their voice in order to be heard. And other times, what's interesting is that when they use their echolocation signals, it can go out, but then it gets masked by the noise, so then they don't hear the return. So then, again, they're missing out on foraging because they can't hear what they're trying to see. Right. So it definitely is a big factor, and there's a lot of debate on how much a factor that is and which one of those is worse. But there's a lot of research going into that.
Is there any particular research in narrow scope that you're doing right now?
For that, or just what we're doing?
In general.
So our right now we're working on some papers about some interesting behaviors that we've been seeing for harbor porpoises. Usually they eat very small fish because they're small animals, but we've noticed they actually catch salmon and American shad. That's the one we're collaborating with people down in California. Mm-hmm. So they're capturing really large fish that almost look like they shouldn't be able to swallow them. They're so big. Really? Yeah. So we're documenting that, and then we're looking into some other cases where harbor porpoises actually have asphyxiated on eating something that's too big. Sure. Because they swallow it, and then it can close off their trachea, and then they can't breathe. Oh. So we're looking into behaviors like that. We're also working on that mating behavior paper about worldwide if this behavior is the same here and everywhere else. We're also looking we have a passive acoustic monitor that we're going to put out, which is really cool. So we like to say, set it and forget it. You can just go put it out in the water and you can leave it there for months or up to a year. Uh-huh. And it will just record vocalizations and ambient sounds. So we could get information on the noise levels of the boats, the noise levels of the fish that are around there, and then the animals that are there. And we can correlate that with our observations, so we can say, oh, this 2-hour period, we were out there for that 2-hour period, and now we can see this is what we heard and this is what we observed. Sure. And connecting the sound and the observations is a big thing that you don't always get to do. Sometimes it's one or the other. So we have to do that, and then that's one of our big exciting things this year. And then the other one that we're really trying hard to do that we need a bit more money to be able to get moving forward is called eDNA, so environmental DNA. And so most of the time to get DNA from marine mammals, you do biopsy darting, right? Which, again, we said before is not the greatest thing to try for harbor porpoises. And this way is actually DNA that's left in the water from when it basically just comes off their skin. So it's been shown in Alaska that when a porpoise dives, you can motor up to where it's called a fluke print, where you can see where it was, and you can scoop seawater. Oh, wow. And they can pull the DNA from the seawater. Wow. It's really cool. Yeah, I guess. So we're hoping that we can get that going here. We need a little bit more money to be able to get the equipment to at least be able to collect the DNA. And then it takes a bit more to have the geneticists run it. But I think that's one of the most exciting things we're looking forward to being able to do.
So what are the major threats to sea mammals in the Salish Sea?
So,
is disease present?
Disease is present. It's not uncommon for marine mammals to have, like, when they do necropsies, they have parasites and they have other things, and that's just like, nah. Sometimes it's the cause of death, but lots of times that's what they have, wild animals. Right. But there are some new emerging diseases. There's a fungus that's showing up in porpoises that they're really looking into, that you basically can't tell from the outside that they're sick, and they look really healthy, and then you open them up, and they're just riddled with this fungus. So there's that. So diseases are an issue, especially if their immune systems are down. They can die from normal infections that they would normally be able to fight, but they can't because their immune systems are down. That can come from not eating enough, so that's what they worry about with the orcas. If they're not getting enough food, their immune systems aren't going to be great, and then opportunistic diseases can come in and take them. So diseases are a problem. At the boats, that's a problem. Pollution is a problem. Marine mammals are top predators, so they're at the top of the food chain, which means the amount of pollutants magnifies up the food chain. So all the little ones eat it, and then the next one eat all the little ones, and then the next one eats all those, and then the next one eats all those, and then the top one gets everything. Right. And because they have all that blubber, it stores in their blubber, it causes immune system problems and possible toxicity and things like that. Mm-hmm. So there's habitat degradation and shoreline usage and pile driving and all those noise things can also affect their behavior and sometimes can cause actual hearing damage. They can measure temporary threshold shifts and permanent threshold shifts, which basically means like you got ringing in your ears for a little bit because you went to a concert and then then it comes back, or you've gone to too many concerts over your life and now you don't hear as well.
Right.
So that's a big problem for animals that use sound for so much of their lives.
Right. Let's talk about orcas. I understand that the orca population is being a little bit constrained.
It is.
What's going on?
So the southern resident orcas are the ones that everybody's worried about. The northern residents, they're doing fine. The big killer whales, they're doing fine. It's the southern residents in particular. They're down to something like low 70s. I don't remember the exact number right now. But they had some calves recently, but most of the calves have not survived. They have low pregnancy rates. Basically, the population is not growing, and there's not a lot of, I don't want to say hope, we all have hope, but they have very few females that are reproductively active, and then again, having calves that survive past the first year. So normal mortality for marine mammals is about 25%. That's normal for mammals in the first year. A quarter of them die. But for orcas, it's something like 50 or 60% pass. So they are doing well. Part of that is that they were the ones that we caught for the aquaria back in I think it was the 60s or whatnot. So their population went down because of that. But now it's mainly, there's debate on this as well, but mainly that they don't have enough food. So the southern residents are specifically eating salmon, and they are specifically eating Chinook salmon. And so the problem with an animal that is a specific feeder, if you eat one thing and something happens to that one thing, you're kind of out of luck.
Right.
And so due to human fishing pressures and environmental changes that either natural or that we have made have caused these salmon runs, as many people know, the salmon runs are crashing and not doing well. So they don't have basically their one main food source. And you might ask, like, well, why are they only eating Chinook? Why can't they just eat other things? That's what everybody asks.
I was going to ask you about adaptation.
Yeah, so the Chinook, so the reason why they eat Chinook is that the energetic content in the Chinook, in order to get the same amount, you'd have to eat 2 to 3 to 4 other species of salmon to get that one. So evolutionarily, it's like, well, I'll just do that one because that's a bigger bang for your buck, so it's great. But the trade-off then is if that's all you're eating. So the other problem is that orcas in particular they have a very strong culture, and they're very good at learning. They learn from their grandparents, like the grandmother is still around even though she's not reproducing anymore, and she's still teaching, and they share food. So what I like to kind of equate it to is people always say, well, why don't they just eat porpoises and seals? That's fine. Well, if you were vegan for 20 years, just go tell somebody to eat meat. That it's not gonna work. So they have developed their foraging strategy over hundreds of years, if not more. So they're so far removed from that, it would be very difficult, first of all, to to behaviorally change that. And then also the way their digestive system work, it may not be able to process that kind of food. And also the other thing about evolution and adaptation is it needs time. So if this was a slow degradation of salmon, that they had time to go, oh, I'm not getting enough of this, here, I'll try this, oh, it works, and then I'll share that with my friends, they would have time to do that. But if the population is crashing so hard and so fast, they're not getting enough food in the first place to be able to do that.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
So it's a combination effect of bad for these guys.
Do you do research on any other kinds of whales, or how's the population of the minke or the gray whale doing?
So we don't do it directly. Like I said, if we see the animals, we take pictures and then we send them to the groups that are doing research on those animals.
Right.
Because again, it's one of the things, we can't do everything. So if we can share with the people, then everybody gets more information. Yeah. So as far as I know, minkies are doing pretty good. I don't know too much about their population numbers. The gray whales, like I said, they were doing good, but they have that. They've been documented now as an unusual mortality event, or a UME. So many have died. But this happened about, I think it was like 20 years ago. They had a similar event. So is this just something that is a natural fluctuation that's happening, or is it something that we really need to be more worried about their population? We're still unsure. They're still doing more research on that. Okay. But the gray whales seem to be doing pretty good. And the humpbacks, like I said, humpbacks are doing great. They're kind of hanging out, doing good things. What's
the difference between a seal and a sea lion?
The seal and the sea lion. So the biggest difference is that the one that you're most likely to see, if you see them in the water, you see their heads pop up. And a sea lion is in the family Otariidae. So it's an otariid. It's an eared seal. So they have tiny little ear flaps on their head. Seals are called true seals, and this is the family Phocidae, and they don't have any ear flaps. So they just have a hole in the back of their head. So that's the main difference. If you see them on land, sea lions have the ability to tuck their hind end underneath them and walk on land, so they could kind of like run.
Sure.
And they have their long flippers that they can hold on to. Have you ever seen a seal on land? They're like a little sausage. Oh. And they have tiny little flippers.
Yeah, right.
And they can't stand on them. They're just like this. Right. And then if they want to run away, they have to kind of, as my 7-year-old son would say, you have to do the worm. So you got to kind of undulate until you get into the water.
Right.
So they aren't able to walk on land like that. Mm-hmm. And then harbor seals are generally quieter. Sea lions are generally louder. They'll do a lot of barking and whatnot. But those are the main differences.
And we're getting out of time, but tell me about sea otters. What's the difference between
sea otter and river otter?
River otters and saltwater sea otters?
Yeah, you're more likely to see river otters here. There's a few sea otters around. Sea otter populations crashed due to the fur trade. They tried to reintroduce them. It hasn't really taken within the Salish Sea. I think there's like 1 or 2 in Puget Sound. But when you see them, sea otters are much bigger, and they are always swimming on their backs. So their faces are up and they have their bellies up and they're doing their own thing. Their tails are flattened, so they're more like a paddle. But a river otter looks more like a rodent. So they're swimming on their stomachs, so their backs are up. Their tails are just long and cylindrical, and they swim like that. And you'll see them go off onto the land and then go into the water. But sea otters you almost never see on land. They're always just floating on their backs.
And they can't use the other's habitat, is that right?
No, yeah, they don't really, I don't know for sure, but they don't really overlap that much. Because mainly, again, sea otters are mainly on the sea, and the river otters they have
freshwater.
Yeah, well, they're freshwater and saltwater, so we see river otters in our study area.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so as long as they can, they can basically go in some fresh water, they can go in some salt water.
I see.
But sea otters you only find in seawater.
Well, Cindy, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I appreciate very much the interview today.
Absolutely.
Our guest today has been Cindy Elliser, founder and executive director of Pacific Mammal Research in Anacortes, Washington. You can contact the staff by going to pacmam.org and phoning 360-202-2860. This has been Wilderness and Wildlife, a presentation of the Gallatin Wildlife Association in Bozeman, Montana. To hear more of these half-hour interviews, go online to kgvm.org. Scroll down to Wilderness and Wildlife. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Jay Shell.